Why do bad people seem to be winning in life? Where is God? We look around this world and we see evil and we say, why isn't God doing anything about this? Today, the psalmist has the same question for God. God, where are you? You may be surprised at the answer. Join us today. Welcome to our Psalm series. Glad you are joining us today. We'll start here. I was reading a story about a pastor who was infatuated as a boy with magic tricks. And there was a Christian magician who came to his church, and he kind of became hooked on magic from there on. He began to buy books and study it at a very, very early age. He would spend hours and hours practicing magic, and when he got his first job at 14, he spent most of his money on buying new tricks. One of his favorite tricks was to make things disappear. But knowing that a magician is never supposed to tell you the secret of how that happens and how things actually do disappear, he does shed some light on this. He said this, and here's the truth. Things don't disappear. It is always an illusion. I love that. It's always an illusion. They appear to disappear, but they actually never do. And that's what this next psalm is all about. Hey, God, you seem to have disappeared. I don't know where you are. You're just gone. Are you hiding? Where are you? But never forget that it's just an illusion. God never disappears. But it's a great reminder today that there are times in our life when he feels silent. And that always confuses us, especially when we look at what's behind me today. We see the sky, stars, the moon, clouds. We see that God is so magnificent and he created all of these things. And you would think if we need to hear from him, that we would hear from him. But sometimes we look at that and we say, wow, what's out there seems silent. I had a friend of ours that had a baby, and a few days after it was born, it actually died. And all she would tell me is I would try to pray. And I felt like my prayers were bouncing off the ceiling. It was as if God just wasn't around. So I get that, and that's kind of where we are today. But this psalm is a little bit different. It's not almost this whole idea of, God, where are you? You seem so silent. This is, God, where are you? Because I look around and all I see are evil people, and they seem to be winning. Like, why aren't you doing anything about it? Not silence regarding, like, I just feel like he's distant, but silence on, why aren't you doing anything about this? It makes no sense to us. And this is where we find the psalmist today, confused, wondering, what in the world is going on, God? Where are you? Because all around, all we do is see people who look like they're winning. And yet they want nothing to do with God. And we're so confused. We don't understand that. These people that we know are arrogant. They're evil. And yet they seem to be prospering. Like the drug dealer who lives in the mansion and drives the Ferrari. Like the guy who's stealing from his company and taking bribes. And yet he seems to be living this great life of ease and vacationing all over the world. How about the sex trafficker who's making millions by doing evil and selling young girls, and yet he owns a yacht and hangs out on that? And honestly, we just don't get it. But here's what we need to know. We know God sees it, but why is he silent? That's our question. We need to know the answer to that. Because here's what else. We know God can do something about this, but he isn't doing anything. And that is what confuses us. And that's what actually confused the psalmist. Here's the first thing that we need to know. We can ask why. We can actually say, God, I don't understand what you're doing. This makes no sense to me. We can say, God, why did you let that happen? Why did you let that drunk driver kill that family? Why did you let that crazy person go into that school and shoot up all those children? God, why would you do that? We can ask away, and we should, because that's part of having a relationship with God. But here's what you need to know. We can ask why, but we probably won't get an answer. Just know that going into it. We see this in the book of Job in the Bible, when Job asked why. He lost everything, his children, his wealth, his servants, his health, everything. But he asked God why. But God never answers his question. But instead, God turns around and starts asking Job questions. Look at Job 38:3. Brace yourself like a man, God tells Job. I will question you, and you shall answer me. And God starts in on Job. Where were you, Job? Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? In other words, Job, where were you? Do you even know why I do what I do? Like you're asking me, I'm asking you now. He says, verse 8, who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in its thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is where your proud waves halt. Rob and I were just at the ocean a couple weeks ago, and I kept watching the ocean just roll in and roll in and roll in, and I said, isn't it amazing that the ocean stops right there? And yet God tells us that that's exactly how he created this world to work. So for chapter after chapter, God just keeps asking Job these questions. And when God was done asking him these things, this is what Job said. Job 40, verse 3, then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer twice, but I will say no more. In other words, God, you're just too amazing, powerful. Look at your creation, what's behind us. You do all these things. I don't know why you do what you do, but you know what? I'm unworthy. You're God, I'm just man. So you do whatever you need to do. See, for me, whenever something happens that I don't like or makes me frustrated, I go to Job 38. And I read the whole thing. And I just keep reading until Job gets to this part where he says, God, I don't need you to answer. I'm not, you're God. See, we can ask God and always know that. But for us, he probably won't answer. So as followers of Christ, we just have to walk by faith. We have to recognize that sometimes God does things that we will never understand, and he has reasons and purposes that now do not make sense. But on the other side of heaven, they just might. So we look for a day for that. But here's what I say. The key will be to learn to trust God even when we don't understand. See, a lot of people walk away from their faith. Something tragic happens, they don't understand, God seems silent, why the bad guy's winning. And so they walk away from God because they see the drunk driver wiped out their family, or the politician lied for his own gain, or the murderer gets 5 years instead of life, or the greedy person took someone's money in a Ponzi scheme and he got out on good behavior out of prison. See, we watch a lot of Dateline, and we see the horrors of what people do. And most of the time, Rob looks at me and he's like, what is wrong with people? And I say, I don't know. Because a lot of times God just seems silent. He doesn't seem to be doing anything. And we see this with the very first question the psalmist asks in Psalm 10, verse 1. Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? See, we don't understand that. We know he sees everything, but why isn't he doing anything? God felt very absent on 9/11. God felt very absent when a shooter walked into that school and killed all of those children. God seems distant and gone when that serial killer just keeps killing and killing and killing. And we go, God, I know you see this. But we have to remember this. God is not responsible for evil. People are actually responsible for their own actions. And unfortunately, because of what Adam and Eve did all the way back in Genesis, we live in a fallen world where sin and Satan have a huge influence on it. So knowing that, here's the problem. People. And the psalmist tells us what these people are like. Verse 2 says this, in his arrogance. See, people begin their evilness with arrogance, pride. It's all about them. It's all about me. That starts pretty much when you're born, okay? We have a super cute, super sassy 4-year-old granddaughter. So we were just on vacation with them all, and so we're all eating outside on the grass, and she puts her blanket down, and she's going to sit on it. And our other daughter-in-law, sat down on it, and this particular granddaughter freaks out, told her to get off of this. It was her blanket. Our son was watching this, and he was like, absolutely not. You will apologize to your aunt. Nope. She was not going to do that because that was her blanket and it's all about her. So our son had to take her in the house, have this nice conversation with her. They came back, she's sobbing, she's crying, and she's like, I'm sorry, even though she probably really wasn't. But my son looked at us and he goes, it is amazing the pride and arrogance that a 4-year-old child has. It's mine. Don't touch what's mine. I don't want you near something that's mine. It's all about me and what I want. And this Psalm reminds us that that's actually the root of wickedness, and it's this whole idea of arrogance and pride. It's the root. Pride is really the root of that. Think of Satan, the most beautiful angel. And he becomes arrogant and prideful, and he comes up against God himself like, I'm going to win. Yeah, he's not. Verse 2 says this, in his arrogance, the wicked man hunts down the weak who are caught in the schemes he devises. This just reminded me of things like, sex traffickers, people who abuse the poor. They hunt down people so that they can make money on them. We just had this horrific tragedy that we just saw on the news. And somebody wanted to take people across the border, so they put them in a big trailer, and it's so hot. And I don't know what they were thinking, except they were going to make a whole lot of money on these people. And most of these people died in that truck. It was so horrific. And yet you look at that and you go, you know what? These people hunt down the weak. They don't have any money. They just want to do what they can to get across the border or do whatever. And so what happens is people abuse them. Verse 3 says, he boasts of the cravings of his heart. He blesses the greedy and reviles the Lord. I was thinking about this. My first thought was, wow, that verse sounds a lot like the politicians. This made me laugh. A couple was strolling along the ocean. They were on the beach and they were looking out, and suddenly they saw a bottle floating on the water. They waded out and opened the bottle, and there was a note in it. The note said this, I am marooned on a tropical island. There's no pollution, there's no traffic, there's no noise, and there's no politicians. Please do not come looking for me. And I thought that was great. So there you go. Verse 4 says this, in his pride, in man's pride, the wicked does not seek him. In all of his thoughts, there is no room for God. These people have no room for God. Even though Paul says in Romans this, like they have no room because it's like what? They don't see God around them? Look at Romans 1. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by what? Their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, what we see behind us, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. Men are without excuse. All people can look up at the sky at night and see the moon and the stars and the galaxies and planets and clouds. I mean, everything. And yet they're like, you know what? I don't want God in my life. It's so shocking to me. You see people who, they don't want to worship God. They don't want to believe in God. And that's a serious, serious problem. Because on the flip side to that, if you're a follower of Jesus and you love God, people who love him have room for him. They don't act wicked and evil because they're filling their lives up with God. But if someone doesn't have room for God, then here you go, they only have room for themselves. See, as Christians, our life should be filled with the Holy Spirit. And the outflow of that is loving people and being joyful and kind and all of those kind of things. What is really interesting is this. How someone believes, what someone believes in, actually has a huge effect on how they act in this world. Because think of this. Not believing in God makes them their own God. Which means they can live however they want. They're the captain of their own ship. Nobody can tell them what to do. Here's the problem with people like that. Psalms 10 verse 5. His ways are always prosperous. That is what frustrates us. This is so, because the bad guys seem to be the ones with the most money. The bad guys seem to be the ones with the life of ease. But honestly, if we look at life like this is our only life on planet Earth, and forget that there actually is an eternity after those evil, wicked people die, then of course that's going to bother us. But Psalms 37:1 says this, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. But the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming." See, even if someone lives this wicked, luxurious life for 80 years, eternity is forever. And they will spend that in judgment, is separated from God in a place called hell. They may seem to be winning for the moment, but we need to remember that we can't just look at what's here. We need to look past the moment and realize that they may not get theirs here, but they will after they die. And that's a really sad, horrifying thought. He goes on to say in verse 5, "His ways are always prosperous. He is haughty, and your laws are far from him. He sneers at all of his enemies. He says this, 'Nothing will shake me. I'll always be happy and I'll never have trouble.'" Like, people actually think that way. They think no one's going to take me down. I've got money, I've got fame, I've got fortune. And I always think it's so funny. And I think God actually thinks it's funny too. Like, are you guys joking? Verse 7 says this about this kind of man. "His mouth is full of curses and lies and threats. Trouble and evil are under his tongue. He lies in wait near the villages. From ambush he murders the innocent, watching in secret for his victims. He lies in wait like a lion in cover. He lies in wait to catch the helpless. He catches the helpless and drags them off in the net. His victims are crushed, they collapse, they fall under his strength. He says to himself, 'God has forgotten.' He covers his face and never sees." People actually believe that God doesn't see what they're doing and they're just going to get away with it. I don't think so. But the problem is, just because God lets them continue and we see that, we know it's just for a lifetime. And it makes sense that if someone is never, ever caught, that they just think, well, God's not going to hold me accountable for what I'm doing. There must not be a God. I think about 9/11 or the Boston Marathon bombing. We look at what's going on in Afghanistan, the horrors, the atrocities that are happening there. We see, Russia invading Ukraine. And we really look around, we see these leaders who are doing things that are harming people and hurting people. We say, God, where are you? why are you letting these people do these things? Because in all honesty, justice isn't swift. Think about Osama bin Laden, the man who masterminded 9/11, killed 3,000 American citizens. It took 10 years to bring him to justice. And during those 10 years, he lived in a life of relative ease and comfort in a $1 million compound. So see, the psalmist, and most people think the psalmist is David, but he cries out because he's like, God, the evil people are winning. But then he reminds us of this. He reminds us of what we need to do when we start feeling like that. Turn our focus from who seems to be winning to who will ultimately win. Look at verse 12. Arise, Lord, lift up your hand, O God. Do not forget the helpless. Why does the wicked man revile God? Why does he say to himself, he won't call me to account? See, we have to, by faith, remember this, verse 14. But you, O God, you do see trouble and grief. You consider it to take it in hand. The Bible says, and Psalm says right here, God has not forgotten. He sees everything. He goes on to say, the victim commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. And David, if he's the psalmist, if he's the one who wrote this psalm, said this, break the arm of the wicked and evil man. Call him to account for his wickedness that would not be found out. And then he says this in verse 16, the Lord is king forever and ever. That is like the greatest reminder. Someday, Jesus is coming back. And he is coming back to judge those that are evil, wicked people. Look at Revelation 19, verse 11. Now I saw heavens open, and behold, a white horse. And he, Jesus, who sat on him, was called faithful and true, and in righteousness what? He judges and he makes war. Most people think Jesus is meek and mild, and he walks around with, holding lambs or whatever. Look at who he is when he comes back. Verse 12, his eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood. His name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, and with it he should strike the nations. And he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God on all of those wicked, evil people. I love verse 16, and he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So verse 16 said, the Lord is king forever and ever. The nations will perish from his land. Jesus will rule. There's something really exciting about that. Verse 17 says, you hear, O Lord, the desire of the afflicted. In other words, God does listen to when we cry out to him. He said, you encourage them and you listen to their cry, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, in order that man who is of the earth may terrify no more. One day, Jesus is coming back to this earth, and he is going to set things right. And that gives me such hope, knowing that those people who hurt people, harm people, abuse people, that God always sees, and he will always render judgment due. So if this is you today and you're frustrated with those people you see around you, just remember that the psalmist felt the exact same way that you do. He started out writing in verse 1, God, where are you? And he ended where we should end. You are God, you see, and you will judge. Hope that helps you today. Have a really good day.